So right now we decide what to put in the form based on the value of current note in the state of main here, current note. But we're saying, let's find out which note that is based entirely on the URL. Because we know that param is making it in there, right? Here we've got notes slash whatever. If I look at my note form component, I have match.params.id. Is that in main? Match.params, nothing. So when we switch between notes, the only switch that actually changes is this switch here. So it only changes note form, and it sends it a new set of props every time I click a new one. It doesn't change main. The props to main don't change. So main can't get to that ID. So we can't just update current note inside the state of the main component. We're going to have to actually get that down in the note form. But how? Well, it seems that maybe note form is going to have to keep track of the current node itself. Main no longer kind of needs to care. The current note only really matters to this so it can highlight it, but we've already taken care of that by using a nav link. And then the form is really the only thing that cares which node it is. Sidebar doesn't care. So current note probably doesn't need to be tracked at the main level anymore. All it's being used to decide is which node is displaying in the form. And before, because that changed by clicking something in note list, we had to elevate the state up to main because both of those components needed to know about it. But now, all note list needs is a nav link. It's just changing the URL. So what I'm trying to get at is now it seems like note form is sort of responsible for its own destiny. It needs to keep track of what that note is. So what do we have to do to it? What am I trying to say? I think note form needs state. I think it needs to keep track of which note's being edited. So we're going to have to turn it into a class. I've got way too many things open here. Close a few up. All right, so note form right now, it's just a stateless functional component. So instead of importing just React, I will import both React and component from React. And instead of const note form, I will say class note form extends component. And this list of props won't work like this anymore. I'm going to actually put these on the clipboard so I don't forget about them. So handle changes is going to be just a method now. So no const. And what am I returning? Well, this is the return value of my render method now. So I'll indent that. Don't forget my closing curly brace. And voila, it's a class. So what I could do inside render now is const that list of props equals this.props. So I can still extract them out into variables. Now I'm not using save note inside render. I use save note up here. I've got the squiggles here to help me. So this.props.save note. And this is this.props.current note. So I can take save note out of the list down here because I'm not using it down here. So why did we do this? So we could track the note being edited in state. So let's give it a constructor. if we think we need a constructor. Do we need a constructor? Wouldn't absolutely have to have one, right? We could just set state. So sure, how about that? State equals. And it's going to need to track a note. I'm not going to call it current note down here. I'm just going to call it note, I think. And what should it be? It needs to be a blank note, right? It needs to actually have a title and body we found, or stuff breaks. Or at least we get that warning about turning an uncontrolled form into a controlled form. So blank note is way up here in main. Long term, since I don't think current node is going to stick around up here, I think we can just move this. We don't have to pass it down as a prop. We can probably just move this down there. So I'm just going to copy it for now so I don't break things. But I think blank note could just live down here. So note could be this dot blank note. Initialize it that way. So then the input should not be tied to current note.title, but this .state.note.title and this .state.note.body. And it's not handle changes anymore. We're a class now. It's this .handle changes. So I'm no longer using current note out of this .props, so I'll just remove it from the list. How's it looking right now? I got all kinds of problems. Blank note's not a function. This .blank note. So since I'm calling a method from inside there, this does need to be inside a constructor. I can't use a property assignment. No big deal. Worth a shot. So that becomes this .state. Don't forget, pass our props into the constructor and pass them up to the constructor of the superclass. So what else should change? What about handle changes? So here we're copying this .props.current note. Now it's this .state.note that I want to change. So this should be a copy of this .state.note. Then, yep, we just change the value, and then we call this props save note. Seems all right. Oh, man. I got two problems. Every letter I typed, it created a new note, and the form doesn't update when I type anymore. We're back to this old problem. That's all right. We've done this before. I'm sure we can figure it out. So first of all, we don't see what we type. That stinks. Why not? So the input is going to show whatever this .state.note.title is. And when we handle changes, we save note, but we never update state, do we? It's not getting it from a prop on main anymore. It's getting it from its own internal state. So we need to say this .set state note. Like that. Make sense? All right. I seem to be able to type in here now. Okay. We fixed both of those problems. Whew. So if I click around, Yeah, it's still not getting them from the URL though, is it? Now this thing's at least managing its own state, but it still doesn't change with the URL. So we're halfway there. We should commit that much. Add state to note form. So how did we say we can even find this ID? Inside note form, match this.props.match.params.id. Okay, so if we find that, we can find out which node it is. So we're going to need the list of notes inside here. So I think we're going to have to pass those down, because it's going to have to search in for the matching ID. So up in main, here's we have our form props. How about we just add the list of notes? This.state.notes. Let's pass them down. So I don't think we're using current node in there anymore. So I'm going to take that out of the list of props. And hey, I only have to change it one place, not both of these places. So now note form has the list of notes as an array. Cool. So what do I do with that? I need to do that every time the URL changes. And when I change the URL, what's going to change inside note form? How does note form get the URL? Through its props, right? React Router sends props, history, location, and match. So the props are going to change every time I click a new one. And yesterday we used a lifecycle function for that. Do you remember? Component will receive props. So after the constructor, let's write component will receive props. And I think it was showing me some of the documentation there. Called when the component may be receiving new props. It may call it even if the props have not changed, so be sure to compare new and existing props if you only want to handle changes. So we'll make that an arrow function. Component will receive props. And the new props will be passed in as an argument. So let's get the ID out of there. Const new ID equals new props. So these are the incoming props that haven't yet changed. Dot match dot params dot ID. So get the ID from the URL. Next, we need to find the note with that ID. Then we need to update state with that note. Right? That's what we need to do every time the props change. Every time we click on a new note, we need to get the ID out of the URL, find the matching note, and then update state with that note. That's what's going to make the form change. So how do we do this part? Where else are we doing something similar? Every time we save, I think. So inside main, there is save note, and we do this. We find index and compare the IDs. So new props.notes is the array. Find index. We compare the ID of this note to the ID that we pulled out of the URL. So that's new ID. So then const note is new props.notes square bracket I. Then we could say if note this.setState note. Make sense? So we're getting the ID out of the URL every time the props change, which will happen every time we click a new note, because when the URL changes, React Router changes our props. So then we need to find the note that actually has that ID, so we use find index again to look over the list of notes, which is also being passed in as a prop. So new props.notes, find index, compare each one, compare the ID of each one to the ID that we pulled out of the URL. Then assign a local variable note to whichever note has that index. And if we found one, set state with the new note. What? We've been betrayed. What's going on here? Let's see, we finding it? It's console.log I. -1. It's finding -1 every time. What gives? Let's console log new ID. Okay, that's the number we expected. So let's look at new props notes. React, DevTools, note form. Here's match params ID. There it is. There's props.notes array. There's a slight difference in how this ID is showing up here. Did you catch it? There's no quotes around this. Up in match params, there are quotes. This is a string. The one coming from Firebase is not a string. It's a number. So they're not going to show up as equal. So we can convert this one to a string. We can convert them both to a string just to be sure. And we happen to know that it's always going to be a string when you pull it out of params like that. If you just convert them both to a string before you do the comparison, that's better. Now it works. Don't forget to get rid of your console logs before you commit, especially get rid of debugger statements. So it works. Populating the form based on the URL. Happens if we click new note. What about delete? I've got like 30 of them I want to delete now. Can't win them all. Hey, it's progress. Let's commit. Populate the form based on the route param.